Good day and welcome to the group presentation of the Moraletta Park Integration Project. The team is made up of 7 researchers within the University of Pretoria's Architecture Honours course led by Dr. Karen Kombrink and Jason Oberholzer. The focus of the group is the exploration of ideas of urban citizenship within contemporary South Africa. This quarter's work concerned the exploration of spatial agency through the process of co-design. The research area is located in Gauteng, Pretoria, and consists of 2 informal settlements. Plastic View and Cemetery View are located in the interstitial spaces of a high-income area in Pretoria East, surrounded by private security estates. This creates a context of tension which raises questions of land ownership, private versus public space relationships, and spatial justice within post-apartheid South Africa. The mapping and contextual research of Quarter 1 consisted of quantitative and qualitative data analysis undertaken on-site and through desktop study. This resulted in the generation of a digital mapping booklet which was made available to stakeholders and other institutions working in the settlements. Following this, community action plans were produced to help address the settlement's main issues, as identified by residents. These were also made available for information and use. This link provides access to the mapping and community action plan booklets for further reference. The existence of settlements such as Plastic View and Cemetery View illustrates how everyday citizens are contributing to the design and spatial articulation of their environment. It is within this framework that co-design is a method of facilitating spatial agency. Co-design has the potential to offer more agency to clients and end users, especially vulnerable groups such as those in Plastic View and Cemetery View. However, due to the gap between co-design theory and architectural practice, it is important to explore co-design methods and their applications to provide citizens with a greater say in their built environment.
Having briefly outlined the findings of the community mapping and community action planning exercises in Quarter 1, we now move to the co-design process undertaken this quarter. For each group member, this presentation comprises the first half of the process, that being from Phase 1 to the start of Phase 4. Presentation will briefly cover the first 4 weeks of the co-design process undertaken by the ISF CoDesign Honours Group 2020 in order to illustrate the process and the outcomes achieved. We will commence with an introduction to explain the group structure and the research methodology. 7-week phased process is as follows. The presentation will cover an overview of web-based co-design tools and then the identification of collaborating partners, which both function as precursors to the remaining 5 weeks of engagement with the various stakeholders. The co-creation of the design brief and co-generation of conceptual ideas will be unpacked in this presentation. Because the process commenced as group work, with smaller groups breaking off after week 4 for the eventual development of individual projects, the remaining phases will be elaborated on for each respective project in individual second presentations. The research methodology consists of a hybrid approach, employing desktop study, video conferencing, informal interviews, and online collaboration using a number of digital tools. This research methodology informs the subsequent engagement methodology, which represents the 5 phases of stakeholder engagement. As previously mentioned, Phase 1 and 2 were centered around preparing for the remaining 5 phases. Phase 2, for example, was centered around both identifying stakeholders as well as setting up initial engagement methodology. 5 weeks of stakeholder engagement followed the preparation weeks and can be seen here spanning between week 3 and 7. The timeline briefly explains the 7 weeks and will be elaborated on further in the coming slides. Now on to the co-design dialogue. The first 4 phases as investigated as a large group.
With that, we can move into the first phase of the research, overview web-based design tools to serve as co-design instruments during our engagements with stakeholders. Each member of the group did a preliminary investigation into 3 web-based tools, after which we chose the ones that best met the criteria and further explored them. I will elaborate further on this process, which began with the establishment of assessment criteria formulated after co-design theory. Design games provide an accessible means for user participation and autonomy within the design process. For this reason, online co-design tools were assessed with reference to their potential use for facilitation of design games. In order to assess the suitability of online tools for co-design, an assessment criteria relating to accessibility and interactivity were developed. Additionally, reference to co-design techniques based on Howard and Somerville and co-design game characteristics based on Fiaccalio and Matal-Marchi was used to measure the academic soundness. An assessment rubric was developed and filled in for each web-based tool. The rubrics were then translated into graphic representations of suitability of all 18 tools that were identified. Each tool was assessed within the criteria and scored according to the total of the quantitative score to evaluate the potential for CoDesign game application. This resulted into a selection of 4 tools to support the upcoming engagements: WhatsApp for instant messaging, Mural as an online whiteboard, Google Meet for video conferencing, and Google Drive for online sharing and collaboration.
In the next phase, through theoretical considerations and negating challenges with opportunities, we derived a method of engagements to identify the appropriate stakeholders. In an inclusive built environment, the rejection of the idea of the hero author is necessary to allow for more autonomy to the end user. Co-design is based on the idea of sharing authority between experts and people within the design process. And when this is successful, the professional gives up absolute authority and co-design becomes possible. This relates to spatial agency by asserting that architecture should be seen as a social agent, which challenges existing socio-economic injustices. Of course, the pandemic presented major challenges. We couldn't engage with the communities directly, leading us to look for external but representative stakeholders. Most of these stakeholders have been active in the community for a long period, meaning they have key insights on the needs and aspirations of the residents. Working with the groups that are actively engaged within the settlements and their issues allow the research to contribute meaningfully over time, beyond the realm of a purely academic exercise. The use of digital tools had its limitations regarding ease of use and ethics. However, this did make documenting the process much easier. First, we identified possible stakeholders from our mapping exercises with the help of a key stakeholder. Then, with a meeting with willing participants, we mapped the relationships between them. Afterwards, we sent an official invite that contained a poster and a survey to gauge several aspects such as basic information, availability, preferences, accessibility, and privacy. The survey really helped to establish a communication protocol with the stakeholders. We used this information to develop an engagement outline based on co-design methods and prepared for the first official engagement. We would introduce the sites, set out the rules, the goals, challenges, and opportunities with the intention of generating a design brief.
Once our stakeholders had been established, we commenced with Phase 3, co-creation of design brief. This slide provides an overview of the engagement process and tools used within Phase 3 to co-develop a design brief with stakeholders. And here, an overview of engagements conducted in the week to determine the main problems and desired outcomes for the settlements according to stakeholders. A successful element of this process was the circulation of a Google form in which stakeholders explained their individual concerns. These replies were then used by us later in the week to guide a key mural session with stakeholders. Issues identified through the survey were discussed and sorted verbally by stakeholders during a live mural session, whereafter 4 main themes emerged. These main topics provided insights into the motivations and aspirations of each stakeholder and presented a scope of issues to be addressed in non-hierarchical and tactical ways over time. These outcomes, as well as principles raised by the stakeholders, were then used to develop a general brief for our group, emphasizing sustainable, tactical, and incremental interventions which acknowledge the contextual cues of pertinent issues in the settlements, as well as the Envelope pilot project, a proposed feeding scheme planned for Cemetery View. These concepts are further expanded on in the full design brief.
Now that a brief had been developed, initial conceptual ideas could be explored. Once again, the engagement methodology for the week, which made use of several digital tools. Engagements were held as part of this phase with stakeholders. Individuals presented concept proposals based on the brief and previous stakeholder discussions for comment and further iteration. This resulted in new insight from stakeholders and led to the development of a list of general limitations and challenges that each proposal had to respond to. With this new information, smaller groups were formed to tackle different programs and ideas. Group A focused on essential community amenities and health support. Group B focused on food security in the form of a modular system, a waste management system, and how these systems can advance early childhood development. And Group C's focus was on social capital platforms in terms of community networks and intangibles. All these programs have desired links which were identified during concept development discussions.
These smaller groups programs will remain as part of a greater network, interlinking them all in holistic symbiosis. In order to foster the smooth operation of the interventions and cooperation of the people involved, an emphasis was placed on the phasing actions into now, soon, and later stages. Individually, each group will be able to focus its attention on particular sectors. Nonetheless, the groups work in close partnerships in order to reach an overarching outcome for the neighborhood of Moraleta Park, thus continuing and expanding further on the integration program proposed in Quarter 1. As we conclude this section of our group work, what to keep in mind is that informal settlements are born in places with jarring spatial injustices, but the mere fact that they exist is in reality a miracle, as they disrupt this exclusive urban fabric. The story of people living there and how they live their lives is a powerful one, and we believe that adopting a co-design approach will lead to more sensible designs for the Moraleta Park neighborhood.